What's going on, everyone? About 55% of the S&P 500 closed up in the green today, and as we could tell by looking at today's heat map, there were not too many stocks that had truly explosive moves, and this has a lot to do with the giant week we have ahead of us with earnings, Jerome Powell's speech, and a crucial interest rate decision. There's going to be a lot of opportunities this week, a lot of volatility, and a lot of craziness, and a lot of traders right now are just sitting on the sidelines waiting to, one, get more of these earnings past us, but also get closer to this big Jerome Powell speech and interest rate decision. But going into tomorrow, we do have a lot to cover, especially with Tesla. I guess you could say some interesting data about the modern consumer, as well as a couple stocks that are starting to move in some pretty crazy ways. So with that being said, Tom, let's jump right into today's episode.
Yeah, the overall market pretty much did nothing today, right? I know people love to hear that right away. You know, the SPY was another chop fest. I would say even Friday, the SPY was pretty choppy overall. And once again today, we saw it chop around. It only closed up 0.06%. And like you said, the heat map was very mixed, but there were a couple bright spots on here like McDonald's, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But firstly, Mike, Tesla was the big standout today. It was up 5.6% on a day where, a lot of the tech stocks were falling. Now, Tesla has had a bit of a mind of its own over the past, I'd say, year or so, right? It's been moving against the tech stocks a lot, falling earlier this year. Now it's been starting to heat up a bit, but nonetheless, it's up 5.6%. There's some pretty big news here, Mike. So it looks like Morgan Stanley is actually replacing Ford as their top pick for a U.S. automaker. So I thought that was pretty big. Such a influential bank like Morgan Stanley, they're going to replace Ford now with the EV company Tesla, right? And there's a couple big reasons that I saw why this happened. With Tesla's earnings a couple weeks ago, we heard them talk about their energy business growing like crazy, and looks like Morgan Stanley saying that could potentially grow to be worth more than Tesla's auto business in the future, which I thought was extremely interesting. They also talked about some vehicle credit revenues and etc. like that. But overall, Mike, I thought that news with the energy part of their business was pretty big. And obviously, if you have Ford getting replaced by Tesla with such a serious company like Morgan Stanley, I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and that's one of the main reasons, like you said, Tesla had such a great day today. It popped up by just under 6%, and it showed a lot of strength that almost every other area of the market lacked today. So I think as we go into not only tomorrow, but even throughout the rest of the week, it'll be very important to focus on the stocks that are truly moving with momentum. Because as we saw with today's heat map, there were a lot of stocks that just did nothing. And it's like when you have a stock that's just not moving and it's just slow and choppy and boring, it's very hard to have any tradable opportunities out of that price action. So it's like during choppy times, it is more important than ever to focus on where the money is flowing. So with Tesla for tomorrow, definitely keep it on watch. As we all know, when Tesla moves, it tends to move in a pretty strong and momentum-filled way. The short-term price action has definitely been bullish. And Tom, with Tesla for tomorrow, what would you say are a couple key levels to keep in mind?
Yeah, there was some great price action today, and whenever I was watching it throughout the day, I was watching the book map extremely closely, and it came in clutch once again, pretty much calling the high of day. So book map was showing a lot of sellers up around this 234 mark, and you can see that ended up being pretty much where Tesla double topped and started to fall off today. But I will say it held towards its highs fairly well compared to most stocks, and that was pretty good to see. So heading into tomorrow, I'm watching 234 as well as 235. These were the two big areas today. You can see them right there in bright red where all those sellers were stacked up. Around the end of the day, there was like 100,000 shares at 235 and like 70,000 at 234. So those are a couple huge levels for tomorrow. I'll be looking for Tesla to break up, out, and through 235. You could maybe wait for a 234 break as well, but 235 has some pretty stiff resistance as well. But that was such a good move today, Mike. And, if people are looking for a good support, there was a great one right around 226 that we started breaking out above this morning.
Sounds good. And as we said in the intro, we do have a giant lineup in terms of earnings. It's actually the largest lineup of the entire earnings season. So, Tom, what is on the schedule?
Yeah, tomorrow before open, we're going to see a couple big reports. SoFi is pretty big, very popular stock. PayPal, I would say, is in a very interesting setup right now. They really need a good report. That'll be huge before open. Pfizer, British Petroleum, Procter & Gamble, Merck. I mean, there is a lot tomorrow morning. And then in after hours, we have even more influential companies like AMD, Microsoft, which is a powerhouse out there. I'll actually say both of those are powerhouses now. Starbucks, a pretty good value stock that's been low lately around support. They're going to be reporting along with FSLR. They've been going nuts this year, and even Caesars and Lemonade. Very interesting companies tomorrow, Mike. So the lineup is definitely plentiful. I would say, this week and last week were tied, with the very influential earnings reporting. This week, though, there's just so many big names. Boeing and Meta reporting on Wednesday, and then Amazon, Apple, and Intel on Thursday. So that's pretty much the rundown. I would say screenshot this, guys, and study this one later tonight.
Yeah, we have an exciting schedule ahead, but we also had some pretty interesting price action with Tilray after the bell today, as this one started to move in a pretty strong way. Tom, what is the story with this one?
Yeah, it's moving up above $2 a share, and the marijuana sector has been heating up a little bit in the short term with all the presidential candidates switching and etc. But it looks like they actually reported really strong financial results, which was great. They had a 26% increase in net revenue to $789 million. And whenever I start to look through here, Mike, I saw some great positives. There were a couple negatives here. Obviously, the 26% year-over-year increase in net revenue is great. At the end of the day, though, they still had a net loss of $222.4 million for the overall year, but positive adjusted free cash flow of $6.6 million. That's a good thing for them in the short term. And then also they achieved the #1 recreational cannabis market share in Canada, which I thought was extremely interesting to take that #1 spot. And then they're also the 5th largest craft brewer. So there's a lot going on for Tilray actually with these earnings. And it's just good to see some positivity, right? Like if we go to an hourly chart, they've been falling off. They've been negative for a while, but they're starting to bounce really well off this bottom support.
Yeah, and this is definitely worth keeping in mind, especially as the election gets closer. Tilray, when it moves in a very crazy way. And some other marijuana stocks are like CGC, ACB. You have MSOS, which is an ETF of a bunch of them. But either way, just keep this area of the market on close watch in the short term, because obviously any talk related to this industry, especially when it comes to the election, can definitely improve the sentiment associated with these companies, which in turn can make for some pretty good price action. But that is that for Tilray. Tom, we have the big man coming back. Jerome Powell is set to speak on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. There will also be an interest rate decision at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. This is going to be one of the most important events of the entire week, as the market is waiting to hear what is next when it comes to the Federal Reserve and monetary policy and all that good stuff. We can see that there's around a 96% chance that interest rates are going to stay exactly the same, but just like you said yesterday, there's around a 90% chance that we are finally going to see the first rate cut in September.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. I'm really hoping that they stick to the plan in that way. And this meeting will be a big tell, right? Because if Powell comes out and then they start to adjust, say something to make people a little bit worried, the market might start pricing in something a bit different. So that's why this meeting is going to be so influential. So hopefully these percentages still look the same at the end of the week. But we all know that whenever Jerome Powell talks, it can bring in a lot of volatility. And there's even JOLTS job openings tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow morning. So keep that in mind for tomorrow. Sometimes the JOLTS can cause some pretty big moves, but most of the time I'll say it doesn't really do too much.
Sounds good. But while we're on the topic of, I guess you could just say, the economy overall, McDonald's actually reported earnings today, and I think it says a lot more than most people realize. The stock moved higher, which is good to see, but what's kind of funny is that they just completely missed on earnings on many different fronts, which is not a good thing. But as we read deeper into this report, we can see that McDonald's executives are now admitting that diners think prices are too high, and the executives are basically saying they're trying to figure out ways to create value. And I think this goes to show in multiple different ways that consumers are definitely starting to pull back, especially when it comes to, a place like McDonald's that is supposed to be as affordable as possible. And I think it's going to be important to hear what Jerome Powell has to say on Wednesday when it comes to the state of economy, and if he thinks he's maybe a little bit too late to cut rates, or if he thinks we're right on track. But either way, when you look at a company like McDonald's or even companies similar to that, a lot of times they can be a great gauge on the economy overall before the, I guess you could say, the big boys in the Federal Reserve admit what's actually happening.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this even ties into earnings again this week, because so many of these companies are going to be reporting similar things. Like, Starbucks will be doing the same thing Tuesday. Like, what if they report a huge loss of sales because consumers aren't spending? Like there could be a lot of things that come out with these earnings that we start to see, even like Norwegian Cruise Lines, stuff like that. Travel companies, we've been seeing a lot of the airlines start to fall off quite a bit in the short term as well. But it's very interesting, Mike, whenever you start to think about consumers, because, a lot of people are like, hey, we're 100% fine, right? The stocks are all up. But I think that the normal like middle class and, especially the lower class is definitely feeling a lot of the pain right now. That's for sure.
No doubt. So either way, I'm very excited to see what Jerome Powell has to say on Wednesday. And I know a lot of major market participants are eagerly awaiting what his outlook is as well. But talking a little bit more about some action for tomorrow, Tom, SPY recovered a little bit today, but it surely wasn't as momentum-filled as many people would have liked, and it was just completely more choppy than anything else. So with that being said, what would you say are the key levels for SPY for tomorrow?
Yeah, really, this morning in pre-market, SPY started breaking out a bit. There was a bit of a high here around 547 from last week, and in pre-market, it tried to break that, but throughout the day today, once the market opened, it really failed to re-break there. So I'm watching 547 and then resistance right above it around 548 to 548.50. That'll be pretty important for tomorrow. If we start to break there, then watch like 550 to 551 as maybe a next target. But there was so much chop. We're going to have to see some pretty influential moves from the earnings, I think, to get a good breakout going. For support, though, SPY was stuck in a pretty big range towards the end of last week, so I'm watching 544, 542, and 540 as the more major areas of support. Of course, guys, this is SPY. There's going to be a lot of very small levels mixed in, but these are the more major areas that I'm going to be watching.
Sounds good. And the levels you listed are extremely important, but it's also extremely important to be aware of how the market is changing. Tom, imagine if we saw this sort of setup in the market a couple months ago. SPY, instead of closing up on the day by 0.06%, it might have closed up by 1% or even more, right? This change in market sentiment goes to show a lot, because the market has certainly been a lot weaker and choppier and different than it has been over the past couple of months. And, that's not necessarily something to feel good or bad about. It's just something to realize and adapt to. So as we go into these next couple trading days, understand the market is changing. It's getting a little bit weaker than normal, but it's moving in a different way where we could see a lot of the recent big, strong moves that we've seen out of SPY have been to the downside. And the pops that we are seeing are definitely slower, choppier, and just not as consistent.
Yeah, and last Wednesday was like a perfect example of this. We saw that streak break where we've been 356 or so days without a pullback of 2% or more, and we finally broke that. We're definitely seeing some movement that we haven't seen in a long time here on the SPY. And if we start to see some of these supports start to give out even more in the short term, it's going to get even worse, Mike. So I hate to say that with the SPY, but price action's been shifting, and we've been seeing a lot of different price action and movement here in the short term. But I feel like what's been happening is we're almost seeing like a buy the rumor, sell the news type of thing going on with the overall situation with the Federal Reserve cutting rates. People have been buying up the market like crazy in anticipation of these rate cuts happening sooner rather than later, right? And I feel like now that we're starting to get to the point of the cuts actually happening, now the market's starting to shift a little bit, Mike. It's a little weird, right? But it's kind of one of those situations, and we see that happen sometimes with news with big companies and etc. But I feel like that's kind of happening in the overall market right now.
No doubt. So exciting times are ahead, that's for sure. But Tom, let's get right into the good stuff for tomorrow, which are some setups and predictions. A stock I'm continuing to watch very closely is CVS. I talked about this one in yesterday's video to the upside, and it had a pretty nice move to the upside today, which is great to see. It is still on my radar going into tomorrow, as we are now to that key like $62 area, which is a resistance level. A big one, especially as the stock has been struggling to break above this for the past couple months. But basically, I'm looking for a breakout of this $62 area and then continuous pressure on the stock's recent highs. If that's the case, I think the stock will offer some great upside, I guess you could say, opportunities over the next couple days.
Yeah, I really like that resistance, and it had a good pop today, even up into the resistance. So I'll definitely be watching for that to break over the next couple days. And, this is the third test of that resistance here in the short term. So I'm definitely going to watch it a little bit more closely than usual, right? With my first play, I'm looking at AMD, and AMD's been pretty wild here in the short term. I'm actually going to look for them to break down below this 138 support. I really like a 138 to 140 as more major support here in the short term. So if I do end up seeing the floor give out, then I'm going to look for another flush on AMD, right? I feel like that the price action in the short term has been pretty rough. Whereas, if we look at something like Tesla, we're seeing it close around highs today, have some good short-term news, good movement, but AMD is kind of like the exact opposite here.
All right, good stuff there. Another stock I'm watching pretty closely is Alibaba, and it had a pretty good day today. Chinese stocks like this one definitely have a lot of their movement in after hours and pre-market, but when they do move with momentum on an intraday basis, the price action normally is pretty good. It tried to truly break out today, but it just failed right at this $79 and you could say 40-cent area. If we can get back to that level tomorrow and again put pressure on the high of day with strong volume and just good momentum, the stock definitely has that parabolic potential. But again, we need to get this stock back to this recent resistance level, and it truly has to move in a way that is filled with momentum. But either way, Alibaba is on my radar.
Yeah, that was a pretty good move today overall, obviously with the pre-market bounce, and I think that we'll see a little bit more intraday opportunities on these China stocks as the bullish pressure in the short term continues. But with my next play, I'm actually looking at Tilray, Mike. I love the way Tilray moved around $2 today, and I'm going to look for more positivity out of this stock tomorrow. It is falling down in after hours a little bit. Now, keep in mind Tilray's options, right? They can be a little bit fishy here and there. You might even be able to play shares with Tilray. It's not bad. For example, so far from where it closed today to the high of after hours, it moved 12%. So that's a pretty big move. You can even catch shares on this one, but I'm just going to be watching the MJ sector very closely in the short term, Mike. I like the good positivity with the earnings. Then we've also seen some volume come in lately with some presidential news as well.
Awesome. All right, well, it's now about that time for today's momentum plays. And with the first one, we have MGM to the upside.
MGM was in one of those sectors that honestly did pretty good today. They rose up 2.25%. So if they can break above the high of day right around 43.20, then watch them up tomorrow.
All right, with the next one, we have LUV to the downside.
I don't know what's up with the airlines, Mike, but they are dying in the short term. LUV had earnings a couple days ago, and they're not having the best reaction. If they move under $26, then keep watching them down.
All right, and then with the last one, we have GS for both directions.
Goldman Sachs is a pretty wild bank stock, and it's kind of right in the middle of the range here. So there's a pretty big support around 490 to 491. So if we see 491 give out, I'll be watching GS to the downside tomorrow. If it ends up breaking back above 496, then I'll be watching it back up for another test of 500.
Sounds good. So we have that upside level for a potential move higher. We have the downside level for a potential move lower, and that's with Goldman Sachs. With the next one, we have that downside level with LUV, and then the upside level with MGM. Either way, these three stocks are on watch for potential day trades tomorrow. If and only if they break through the levels Tom listed, the stronger and more consistent these stocks are tomorrow, the better the setups become. So keep them on watch. And besides that, let's jump right into today's $1.5 million big money trade. And we are looking at ticker symbol NFLX, Netflix. So Netflix is a stock that has been blasting higher over the past couple of years or so, and it's very close to its all-time high, right around $700 per share. This is a giant resistance level, as well as there's just a shift in market sentiment, and this has made for Netflix stock to pull back a bit. It reported earnings a couple weeks ago, and it had a mixed reaction, and it has been fading slowly lower ever since. Looking at Netflix right now, the big money put $1.5 million into the 655 strike put options that expire on October 18th of 2024. These put options are definitely expensive, but they do have a lot of time to them, and they are in the money. I'm someone who thinks Netflix definitely has more room to pull back over the next couple of weeks and months, so I definitely like the setup, but I also think it's something that can definitely take some time, and I think this week will also be extremely pivotal for Netflix due to how a lot of these other earnings reports come out from these other big tech related companies, plus the change in market sentiment from the interest rate decision and Powell's speech as well. So long story short, I like it. I see potential, but I would not be surprised at all if we saw a lot of volatility in the short term.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I wouldn't even be surprised to see a little bit of chop as it's on these supports, but these earnings this week are going to be very influential, right? Like, if we start to see a lot of bad reports come out, I hate to say it, Mike, but it seems like a lot of stocks are just sitting right on these key supports like Netflix is, and the floor is just waiting to give out, right? And it's almost like, that there's like a pillar holding up the floor right now, and I feel like that the earnings are kind of like, hey, are we going to get that pillar to fall, or is somebody going to come repair the pillar and it's going to stay higher, right? But nonetheless, I think that's kind of a funny way to look at it. But nonetheless, these stocks are at crucial supports right now, and Netflix is pretty funny in the short term, Mike. Nonetheless, keep watching that support around like 620. But whenever I look at the stock, it's been consolidating so much in the short term, and I will say there's some pretty big resistances overhead as well, like 640 and 650 in the short term to look for there if it does end up bouncing off support. But there is some time left to this. It goes out to October 18th. It has $1.5 million. So it's not going to be a play that I think is necessarily for tomorrow, right? Maybe they'll look to sell it in a week or 2 weeks or something, but they will hold this. So don't necessarily think like, oh my gosh, Netflix is going to flush down tomorrow and the big money's looking for a flush there, right? They're probably looking for more of an overall move from this entire earnings season and just the entire sentiment with the market that's been shifting lately, right? They might even be looking at that a bit. It's hard to tell, but it is a big play, Mike, $1.5 million, and it's on a very fun stock. Like, Netflix's support here is huge.
Sounds good. And another way to play this is you can just wait for the stock to pop up a little bit and try and snipe an entry right around like 650 to 660 off of those resistance levels. If that happens, you can end up getting a better deal on the option than the big money did. So either way, keep this stock close on watch in the short term, but there's a lot on the schedule for this week. There's going to be a lot of volatility, a lot of craziness, and a lot of big moves. Take the time to mentally prepare yourself now while the waters are still calm, because they surely won't be that way as the week progresses. If you guys are new to the channel, consider demolishing that subscribe button to get our videos recommended to you more often. In every single video, we cover the most important news and plays and setups that you need to know about. We cover charts you never otherwise see, and basically it takes us hours to make these videos, and a lot of times the videos are like 20 to 25 minutes or less. So by subscribing, you definitely get a nice recap and a nice video on everything you have to know for the market for tomorrow. So consider joining the Stocked Up crew and smashing that subscribe button. But Tom, we also have to give a giant shout out to today's member of the day, Crypto Ninja, in the Stocked Up Discord. They had a great post today with GPS, and they've been in the Discord for a couple months now. So huge shout out to you, and keep up all of the great work going forward. Besides that, thank you all so much for watching today, and let's have an amazing week in the market.